Welcome back, everyone, to Profiteers versus the People, the podcast where we debunk the PR of the famously wealthy and put them on crutches. Now, for the uninitiated, crutches is our PR torture test scoring acronym.
C stands for consumer harm, R stands for rich parents, U stands for union suppression and employee abuse, T stands for tax avoidance, often disguised as charity, C stands for child labor allegations, H stands for harassment allegations, E stands for egregious behavior after hours, and the S stands for slap suits and journalist suppression. I'm Money Mike.
And I'm RadBill.
And
So, for the next couple episodes, we're going to be diving into the Koch brothers. And I have to pause and give us a little round of applause here because we are recording a week before release, and we're really proud of ourselves. That being said, the Kochs are pretty old, so there's a non-zero chance that between recording and release, another one of them may have died. And if they have, we're sorry for shitting on the dead, I guess.
we're not sorry, though. And I mean, arguably, David Koch died in 2019, so we are already very much shitting on the dead.
Yeah, we're not sorry. You know, after doing some research, though, on their early lives, I gotta tell you, these guys are pretty chill. I was expecting a ton of dark and fucked up shit, but they're chill.
If by chill you mean chilling, like bone chilling, then I'm on board. But, like, there's a lot of just fucked up shit here.
Yeah.
But before we get into all of that, I think that we need to add a little bit of context as to who the Koch brothers are for those who don't know and why they're so important. So, I think for many Americans, mentioning the Koch brothers elicits images of shadowy right-wing puppet masters, and like, that doesn't seem to be that far from the truth.
Yeah.
But Charles and David Koch, who have been colloquially referred to as the Koch brothers for the past few decades, have wielded more sway in American politics than any other two people on the planet, particularly on the right-hand side of the aisle.
Big time.
Through their network of nonprofit donor hubs, they are responsible for more private money entering the political sphere than anyone else, and dude, it's not even fucking close.
It's a blowout.
An absolute fucking blowout. For the 2016 presidential election in the US, the Koch network raised $880 million for Republican candidates, which is literally double what the Republican National Committee spent that year. They spent more money electing Republicans than Republicans spent.
Yeah.
So to say these guys are kingmakers is a colossal understatement. If
Yep.
you want to run on the Republican ticket, you simply can't do it without Koch money. And furthermore, the Koch brothers super PACs and lobbying groups have a similar effect on American legislation. They hold a number of politicians by the purse strings.
And dude, I'm inclined to say they hold a number of political parties by the purse strings. I'm sure that the Libertarian Party relies, at least to some extent, on Koch money.
I would say wholly, based
Yeah.
on the research that we've done so far, but more on that later. So
Yeah.
I say all of that to say, as we're telling the story and painting this picture of who the Koch brothers are and the lives that they have led, I want you, our wonderful listeners, to keep in the back of your mind the fact that these men are the ones making some of the biggest impacts on who your leaders are and what policies they pursue or don't pursue. And I think that most of you out there would like to think that it's beneficial for our representatives to be representative of us and our situations.
I like it when my representatives represent me and what I want.
It's pretty sick. So, as we're talking about these guys. And in this episode, it's going to be a lot of their early developmental phase. I want you to be thinking, are these people who are representative of my struggles and the things that I believe in? And am I comfortable with them wielding the amount of power that they do? But all right, enough ranting. On to our story.
Today, we're going to be diving into the childhood of the Kochs. Many of the folks who have really done a deep dive on this family will tell you, and we think they're right, that the Koch childhood plays a huge role in what they fought for, who they've become, and what they advocate for today in American politics.
For sure.
So there are 4 Kochs, which I didn't know. I knew about Charles and David, the namesake Koch brothers. There's also Frederick Koch and Bill Koch, who's married to Bridget Rooney, Kevin Costner's ex-wife. I hate to say she downgraded, but I feel like she downgraded.
Boy, howdy did she downgrade. Holy shit.
Howdy. In the wide range of conservative men to choose from, going from Kevin Costner to any of the Koch brothers is just bizarre to me.
There isn't a Koch brother under 80, is there?
I think they're all well above 80.
They saw 80 a long time ago.
Yeah, they were all alive for a good portion of World War II.
Yeah, they are raising people at this point.
Big time. Charles Koch has been the chairman of Koch Industries, the second largest private company since 1967. Now, tracing the rise of an empire can be tricky, but rest assured, Koch Industries was built by Charles and David Koch. However, it is impossible to ignore the fortune serving as the foundation of the organization that was built by their father, Fred Koch, who built an empire helping Joseph Stalin.
More on that later.
And Adolf Hitler.
More on that later, too.
Build oil refineries using a more efficient technology he created after attending MIT. Being caught up in court battles in the U.S. basically meant he was unable to do business in the country for years, hence the business ties in Europe and East Asia.
There's a ton more to that story, and we'll get into it in a bit, but let's just lay this foundation.
Yeah, let's dig into the base level stuff. So frankly, it was a miracle that Fred could rely on the business ties and affluent network of his father, Harry Koch, a founding member and the largest shareholder in the Quanah, Acme, and Pacific Railway. He was also the owner of the Quanah Tribune Chief, which was the result of a merger between the Quanah Tribune and the Quanah Chief, 2 of the 3 newspapers local to the town of Quanah, Texas. His newspaper afforded him the ability to promote the railroad he owned and to vehemently oppose the New Deal, trade unions, retirement pensions, and the regulation of banks.
What a great guy.
Great dude. It runs in the family. His father was a doctor, and his father was a ship owner who wound up marrying the daughter of the mayor of Workum, a city in the Netherlands.
Quick disclaimer, most of what RadBill just shared is directly from a Wikipedia rabbit hole.
Wikipedia! Donate $3 if possible. Is all of this important to the story of the Koch siblings? Not all of it. For the story of the Koch siblings, there's one tiddly bit that we need to hit, and that's that the flame of the Koch brothers' fortune was already lit with oil from their dad before they were born. They had rich parents, basically. That was it.
Very rich parents. I mean, this family has been rich as hell for the past century and a half.
The last 6 generations have had the R.
Less than 10 minutes into our story, they're all R-ing very much. Lots of R.
We can't find where the money begins. The money precedes print media.
The Koch fortune was etched on stone slabs. It just goes back so far.
So Forbes gives the brothers a self-made score of 5, which suggests that they were given a small or medium-sized business that they grew into a 10-digit fortune, which is silly and hilarious because the year Charles took over in 1967, the company had annual sales of $250 million. $2.2 billion in today's money.
Just taking over old dad's mom and pop shop.
His little one-horse show there.
Yeah, his little bakery.
Yeah. But let's dive in and take a closer look.
At Fred.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
So, as briefly mentioned above, Fred Koch was the Koch daddy, and he looks like if Colonel Sanders moonlit as a Southern Baptist preacher. But in 1927, his big break was unveiled to the world, a new, more efficient method of refining oil. Just about any onlooker would tell you that Fred could not have picked a better time to get into oil. You see, America in 1927 was free market as shit. Relative to today, the contrast is stark.
For sure.
Perceptively, this was the perfect place for an oil man. However, the laws that would allow an oil man to ascend to power had already done that for several other oil men who had formed a cartel and grown so powerful they were able to wield the government as a weapon. As such, shortly after Fred's invention was introduced, it was tied up in the American court system by Big Oil for 15 years on the count of alleged patent infringement.
The sweet, sweet irony of a free market environment gatekeeping against a businessman with a better product at a better price. Capitalism.
Capitalism, baby.
Mwah.
Chef's kiss. Fred's company, Winkler Koch, was immediately beaten by the system he would spend the rest of his life trying to recreate. So, what does a true innovator do when facing down the barrel of unfettered capitalism? He runs away, of course.
As one does.
Being that he had been beaten so completely by the free market, he decided to take a stab at evading it and took his innovation to Stalin and the Ruskies, with whom America, by the way, had severed ties a decade earlier. Fred began hosting Soviet planners in Wichita, Kansas in 1929 and would eventually build 15 oil refineries for Joseph Stalin, becoming his number one refinery builder. After helping Russia become a superpower, Fred would then return to the U.S. with $500,000 in 1933, which, mind you, this is the depths of the Depression. So Fred has something that no one else has, and he has an awful lot of it, and that's money. So what does he do? He gets to work buying distressed companies and making babies. He and his wife gave birth to another Fred in 1933, as Freds are wont to do. Fred then partnered with a Nazi sympathizer. He met with Hitler and got to work building a refinery in Hamburg. This man went from doing business with Stalin to doing business directly with Adolf Hitler. He would indirectly assist with the Nazi war effort by supplying high-octane fuel to the Luftwaffe. What a guy! Was that supposed to be your line?
Yeah, no, I just put it in there.
At this
I'm
point,
so glad you didn't see it coming. So it, like the delivery was confused and sad.
Now at this point, Fred, had soured on the Reds that helped him make his dough. Years later, he would write of the horrors he witnessed in the Soviet Union in an article called "A Businessman Looks at Communism." Hitler's Germany, however, was tip-top according to the businessman. He would come to endorse all three Axis powers in the coming years. In fact, he was so keen on Nazi Germany that when his second child, Charles, was born in 1935, he hired a Nazi nanny to raise Charles and Fred for him.
Now, in today's world, we love to hyperbolize the word Nazi. Like, if a person or a group has some traits that are reminiscent of the old goose steppers, we love to say, oh, that's a fucking Nazi. But, like, this nanny was an actual card-carrying Nazi.
Yep.
A Coco Chanel-level Nazi fucker. And in addition to being an avid Third Reich enthusiast, she was also a fan of just child abuse. So she came over with a bunch of like classic German literature that always ended in naughty children being maimed or killed by some nightmarish monster for just basic disobedience. Like she'd be like,
Charles, if you do not properly darn your socks, the evil forest goblins will clip your toenails off and stuff them up your pee hole. I read a thing where they were talking about the Nazi nanny, and they said that she had coordinated poop times for each of the kids. And if they didn't wake up in time for their morning stool, She would give them castor oil and a fucking enema.
Oh, I forgot about the enemas. Like I had to read that article several times. So I was like, does enema mean something else?
Is enema German for spanking? Is that what's happening here?
She was shoving shit up these kids' assholes.
That was our first, this can't be fucking right. This can't be real.
Yeah, right. These are the people making the decisions? The kids who were enemized by their Nazi nanny?
Yeah. By the way, Fred Koch definitely had a fondness of Nazis because he perceived Nazis to be orderly and obedient. But pretty light inspection of Fred's social politics might further inform his fondness for the far-right movement.
Yes. So Fred was a founding member of the John Birch Society and was heavily involved from 1958 until his death in 1967. So I think that describing the goals of the John Birch Society will help illustrate exactly who Fred Sr. was and what Fred believed. So at their core, the John Birch Society was and remains to be an organization essentially formed to combat communism. In many ways, they were kind of like the OG QAnon in the sense that they were hyper paranoid about communists infiltrating the US government and turning our wonderful apple pie and baseball society into an oppressive commie dictatorship. And their witch hunts included many members of the US government, including President Dwight Eisenhower.
Which is crazy. That's crazy.
Bananas. Again, QAnon-esque.
Looking at Dwight Eisenhower and going, nope. No. That guy's a fucking commie.
He's a fucking communist. Like, what the fuck? And they've also been extremely socially conservative.
Yeah.
And today they're actually best represented by the Tea Party, going back to what you mentioned about libertarianism and what the Kochs fund.
Yeah.
I should also mention that the Nazis were also extremely anti-communist. Some of their main opposition in their rise to power was the Bolsheviks. And Fred seemed pretty cool with Nazi Germany and not so cool with Russia. So maybe there's something there. Also, the John Birch Society vehemently opposed the civil rights movement. Some of our listeners more informed on the Koch's philanthropic history might be crying foul here because the John Birch Society funded a scholarship program for African Americans, but there was a crucial caveat written into that program that scholarship money couldn't go to African Americans supporting the civil rights movement. So that's who Fred Sr. was in a nutshell. And remember, these are the ideologies that his children are growing up with.
And dying to adapt to gain the approval of their father.
Yes.
Anyways, Fred Sr. was a busy man, and he knew that the one thing he couldn't afford was to waste time raising kids. But he had means. He had a dream, and he had a wife who had better things to do. So he hired people to raise his kids for him. That was the name of the game. Now, with that being said, it seems he fell backwards into the Mario Bros situation he found himself in, where the kids were broken into sets of two. In 1940, he and his wife gave birth to the twins, David and Billy, and the Nazi that was rearing Fred and Charles left that very same month to celebrate the capture of France with her fellow Germans. At this point, Fred decided he could tend to raising Fred and Charles himself. He implemented his idea of strong parenting and would beat the two with sticks and such. He hired an ex-Marine to raise David and Billy, the younger two, who would egg on and film the two fighting. Morris is what the man was called in all of our sources. We don't have a first name, but he was known to carry boxing gloves so that when the two younger Kochs would grow frustrated with each other, he could just lace the two up, take a step back, and let them solve their problems the old-fashioned way.
We should note that this was the mid-20th century. Filming anything was a very expensive and difficult thing to do. And they were like, well, we're going to film something in our gigantic mansion of a house. Let's film children fighting.
This was an enterprising ex-Marine. He had big plans. It harkens back to Arrested Development. The boy fights. That reference is only going to catch a few people. Maybe we edit it out. But
it didn't catch me, I'll be honest.
A ton of sources we've found do this funny thing where they say, Well, although the boys were rich as hell, they certainly didn't feel that way growing up. Now, what better way to cite their examples of the Koch brothers' hardship than with a little montage?
They didn't get an allowance, having to do chores to get money from their dad instead.
They had to beg their dad for money when they wanted to go to the movies.
They had to go to public school.
Their dad didn't buy the house and TV, even though everyone else was getting one. Basically, their dad didn't want to raise spoiled brats. And none of this stuff is like, yeah, their dad basically bankrolled people to torture his children.
Like, not basically. Like, he kind of did, though.
Yeah, he was raising 2 Nazis and 2 prize fighting chickens. So whatever, he was strict and he expected the kids to try and achieve stuff on their own. Even our more critical sources cite this as a concession to the Kochs, which is bizarre. Like, is there no gray area between raising your kid like a Kardashian and raising them like a fighting dog?
Christ, Fred.
Yeah. High level, their dad adhered to the book for raising white Republican billionaires and kind of sought to make their childhood shitty in the ways that wouldn't disrupt the family's social standing. Like where musicians, writers, and actors have stories of their parents making them like kill the family dog or use illicit drugs at a very young age. These dads always seem to go the authoritarian route. Dinner is a black tie affair that takes place at whatever time to the dot,
Or you get an enema.
or you get a fucking enema.
All right.
And then you're good. One child is rejected by the parents for being too weak or soft. You'll see that quickly becomes Fred Jr. One kid has anger issues that are overtly tolerated or more so accommodated or encouraged.
Yep.
The kids don't get everything they ask for, but they're never going to be refused the necessities for their social standing. None of the Kochs or the Trumps or the Murdochs or whoever were forced to go to a state college.
True.
Yeah. You hear this in most of the stories of the non-tech billionaires alive today. Of course, they came from wealth, but their parents were sadists almost. The world wasn't going to be hard on the kids, and their parents can't recall how the world usually inflicts pain on a person, so they take a stab at manufacturing adversity for their children.
My kids might end up being serial killers, but at least they'll be manly.
That's right. This is Wichita! Because Fred found more comfort cozying up to Mama Bear and seeing shows and operas, Fred Sr. began grooming Charles to take on the throne. David was athletic and gregarious, so he and Charles became close, and Billy, the very youngest, would just fume with jealousy. I think the fact that David always seemed to win the filmed fistfights of their youth probably played a part here as well. Fred Sr. and his wife Mary put their heads together on what to do about Bill's jealousy. And in a fascinating twist, they decided it was best to send Charles away to one of the many boarding schools he would wind up attending. Now this, I think, speaks a ton to what Fred Sr.'s end goal was. It seems as though Daddy almost wanted his kids to hate each other. It seems like whenever possible, he would antagonize the children in an effort to exacerbate the animosity that was festering among them. I've always been inclined to believe that a simple "they're fucking evil" diagnosis is oversimplification, but it really is jarring how deeply committed some of these rich dads seem to just raising evil-ass kids.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
It seems like the intention is to just raise bad guys.
Yeah, I don't know how a childhood like that creates well-adjusted people. I'm not a childhood psychologist, but everything that we've listed up until this point is physical, emotional, and mental abuse. Textbook fucking abuse.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I can't say, oh, he was just an evil guy. Like, he clearly thought that what he was doing was right, but at some point, the results kind of have to outweigh the intentions, you know?
Yeah,
But
I can't look at all of this and go, Fred was complicated.
yeah.
That's not all there is to it. Fred is a fucked up guy.
Yeah. Fred liked torturing kids.
Yeah.
But anyway, so as time went on, through all of the animosity and opportunism, alliances were formed.
Mm-hmm.
Billy and Fred Jr. versus Charles and David. And this would be the case for the rest of these boys' lives.
Yeah, it's the Mario and Luigi and Wario and Waluigi, except everyone's kind of an asshole and we're not really rooting for anybody.
Everybody is both a victim and a predator all at once.
Well said.
And I'm pretty sure I saw an interview or read an interview with either Billy or Frederick, and they still weren't on speaking terms with Charles after the better part of a century. So whatever was happening here had effects forever.
Yeah, I think past a point, by the way, Fred Jr. just left Wichita and was like, fuck this, I'm done. It's interesting how this pair wound up working with each other because Bill, on the other hand, and this will further play out in the next episode, wanted badly to be in league with Charles and David, or was just trying to be Charles. In one pretty wild move, Bill even chose to attend the same military high school that Charles did, but Charles was sent there out of punishment. Pretty huge commitment to the bit on just becoming Charles. Fred Jr. wanted out. Billy wanted in, but they both wound up fighting the outcasts fight, just in different ways.
For sure.
Fred wound up attending Harvard in 1955, where he studied humanities, and the other boys all attended MIT like their daddy.
So when all four boys were in their 20s, Fred came home to visit. And what played out is just a really vivid illustration of the relationship between these brothers, two of them twins, and how they think. This is all from that interview with Jane Meyer. And there was suspicion that Fred might be gay.
Mm-hmm.
This is the middle of the 20th century, and sentiments around sexuality were pretty horrible. So the other brothers, the other three brothers, essentially cornered Fred in a room and said, sign over your shares in Dad's company to us, or we're going to tell Dad that you're gay. And the ploy didn't work, but the level of psychopathy that it takes for the three brothers who weren't part of their own little sect of the 2 and 2 to gang up on someone for something like sexuality and try to use it to get ahead and to get money. I can think of nothing more horrible. It was a group of 4 people trying to make sure that they were Cain due to the fear of being Abel. Also, this isn't explicitly suggested in any of the research that I've done, but I can't help but think that at this stage in the boys' lives, again, late teens, early 20s, I can't help but think that a ton of what was fueling this animosity was vying for daddy's love.
For sure.
I wonder, and this is speculation from Money Mike, I wonder if they truly were like, oh no, if I don't succeed, I will be poor, because I think that they were rich enough that that really probably wasn't part of the conversation.
In no world is that even a possibility. Yeah.
It was more, if I don't beat my brothers, daddy won't love me.
Yeah.
And that is fucking dark.
That is some bleak shit. I think there's definitely an element of that. I think there's definitely an element of, if I don't beat them, Dad won't love me. And I think there's also a groupthink element where,
Yes.
again, Fred Sr.'s running shop like a dictator. And these three are going, well, Fred Sr. doesn't love what Fred Jr. is doing. That means that we have to crack down on him too, and we have to expose him if need be, and we'll get rewarded for this behavior. It's super fucking dark shit for people who have been raised together.
Yes, this is shit that you would see prisoners doing in a prison camp.
A prison camp where the warden has spent all of his time making the camp as fucked up as possible.
Yes.
Like just making people hate and distrust each other as much as he possibly can. This is engineered hatred. And although Fred survived this round, years later, while visiting home once again, Fred Sr. saw that $700 in traveler's checks were missing. He blamed Fred Jr. for the disappearance, threw him out of the house, and cut him out of the will. A memoir of Fred Sr.'s life written in the 60s would be released that neglected to even mention Fred Jr. as one of the kids, saying that Big Freddie and Mary gave birth to just 3 children, Charles, David, and Billy. Charles joined the family business in 1961, David in 1968, and Bill joined that same year, but we'll dig into that in the next episode. In 1966, Charles becomes president of Koch Engineering, and in 1967, while hunting, Fred Sr. shoots a bird square in the face, and the two die together. The bird of surprise and a gunshot wound to the face, and Fred Sr. of a heart attack likely brought on by the orgasmic pleasure he felt ending the life of another of God's creatures. With Fred lying dead in the grass, nature took its course, and Charles ascended to the throne, renaming his father's company Koch Industries in honor of the late patriarch of the family. And that is where we'll pick up next time. Good. Perfect.
Hell yeah. I'm going to hit on this one more time before we close out. How do you feel, RadBill, about the quality and the occurrences in these children's childhoods? And how do you think that would make them good representatives of political power in the United States?
I think it makes them extremely bad representatives for the for any demographic in the United States. What's so funny to me is the idea that almost without a doubt, everything about what the Koch brothers lobby for now was based on the made-up problems that their father faced them with when they were children. Yeah. That's what all of it is. It's just all of that stupid bullshit their dad did where he was like, well, sure, grades in school are a problem, but what about when a Nazi shoots castor oil up your asshole? What will you do then, kids? What will you do when a Marine films you fighting, kids? And that has metastasized into a worldview that is just beyond comprehension.
Dude, metastasized is a great word because Fred Sr. gave these kids ideological cancer. And we're going to get into it a little bit in the next episode about where Charles takes that and where David takes that and whatever. But I think it's safe to say that, like, the only group of people that the Koch brothers should be representing are, like, the serial killers union.
You're right. Like a poli-sci major is in their master's course and the professor faces them with that ever-challenging question. Sure, plenty of groups have some degree of representation. But have you considered who might be representing the police officers who have killed children in the line of duty?
Thank you all so much for listening. Please tune in for the next one. If you think that this was fucked up, the next part gets even crazier.
As this podcast continues, we're going to be digging into a lot of sibling feuds. The one that we're going to go over in the next episode is among the bleakest and most fucked up story of tension in a family I've ever fucking heard. No one dies.
But they might have wished that they did. Anyway, again, thank you for listening. We love you all. Tune in to the next one. It'll be out soon.
We're getting into a groove here. It's going to be out in 2 weeks. Check it out. We'll be digging into the ascension of Koch Industries in the episode after that. We'll be venturing into their political ideology, where their donations are going, and how they're working. Message us on our subreddit, or feel free to drop us a line. Our email's in the down there thingy. We love you all, and goodbye.